Hello, I'm Simon Fisher-Becker, and you're listening to the Sirens of... Oh, what was it?
Oh, we'll keep that. We'll keep that one. That's going on.
I'm really... Sounds of audio, I'm really sorry.
G'day, audiophiles. This is the Sirens of Audio, the show that explores Doctor Who on the audio medium, or in an audio medium. My name's Dwayne.
And my name's Philip. G'day, Dwayne. G'day, audiophiles.
Oh, what a busy day we're having, Philip.
We are, but that's okay.
It's good. It's good to be busy.
It is.
Now, it feels like forever since we've done an episode of what we like to call...
We've got Randomoids.
And I guess it has been, because we did the last one at the beginning of December. And the Randomoid Selectortron chose a couple of great stories for us to talk about this month, namely White Ghosts, a Fourth Doctor adventure, starring Tom Baker and Louise Jameson, and The Axis of Insanity, which is a Fifth Doctor story featuring Peri and Erimem. And we have the great privilege of having Gary Russell join us later to talk a little bit about the Axis of Insanity. So that'll be good, won't it?
It'll be fantastic.
But before we get to that, you know what happens. I see it coming, and we're about to jump in to the rabbit hole. Let's go. Right, Philip. We're in the rabbit hole. Now, the two stories we're talking about today span a couple of eras in Big Finish. Now, we often talk about the eras of Doctor Who on TV, the RTD era or the Hinchcliffe era, but we've got two distinct eras in Big Finish. That'd be the Briggs era and the Russell era. So I want to get your thoughts on what you think some of the distinctive elements of those two periods are, because being long-term listeners like us, I'm sure we can pick up on the differences quite well. Have you got any thoughts on that? Because I'm hitting you with this, and you're literally having 10 seconds to think about it, Philip. I want to get your thoughts on what you think the biggest differences are, because they're both excellent, but they are different.
Can I say the Briggs era is, I think, being divided into two distinct eras as well? Because there's certainly early Briggs, later Briggs. Right. And so in terms of, some of the distinctives between Big Finish now, Briggs era, and Russell era, and I think Gary even mentions it, is just in terms of casting and diversity of casting. So that, more and more productions today are being produced with a more and more diverse cast. We're not, there's no colour blindness in terms of casting. So, everyone doesn't need to be white RP, which it was a lot more of in Gary's era. And Gary also, in terms of his era, they had a stable of actors who were amazing actors who could do all kinds of voices from around the world, and they just use voice artists doing accents as opposed to actually hiring nationalities. So that's one of the big changes nowadays, that they only ever hire nationality. One of the ones we'll see, or one of the ones we talked about recently, was Spanish roles, speaking Spanish with accents as opposed to hiring Spanish actors. And even Gary himself would admit the fact that nowadays he wouldn't do it. But that's a period of time. So that's one of the big distinctions between time. Let's see. Gary certainly was early on being very experimental to see what the Big Finish range could do. It's not that I still think Briggs is equally experimental. It's just less obvious because there's so much more output out there. So I think when Gary was going experimental, it felt, whoa, this is really experimental, where it's harder nowadays, I think, to be out there experimental because so much has been done over such a huge amount of content. which isn't, once again, isn't a bad thing, but it's just one of the things in terms of style. I think Nick tries to get the feel of a period a lot tighter to the era, and so the third Doctor releases, the second Doctor releases, first Doctor, they feel like 60s or 70s TV or 80s TV. I think a lot of what Gary was doing was he was following on the stories, but the feeling of the era didn't matter so much. And I think we'll talk about that with the Axis of Insanity, which is, as much as it's a Peri story, so it's set right at the end of Peter Davison's reign, 80s. It doesn't feel like an 80s story. It feels like a modern story. Well, not quite so modern now because it's so long ago, but it's not trying to get that feel. I think Briggsy really loves to get the music and the sound design to reflect the era a bit more. That's some of the difference, I think. What were you thinking about? Now maybe I can agree with you so much more because I'm sure you've thought about it.
I think the big difference for me was that I think Nick, when they were doing the audio visuals, really liked to have extras content. So that as soon as Nick started, all the stories in Big Finish had extras on the end of the CDs. Whereas that never happened during Gary's time. And so I always find it fascinating to hear stories about that period because it's a little bit more unknown, a little bit more mysterious, what went on behind the scenes and some of the thoughts that you get, because you can always go back to anything that has been done during Nick's era and get some behind the scenes elements to it, whereas you don't get that from Gary. So that's probably the number one thing.
I'm not sure that's production storyline in terms of classically producer stuff. I mean, certainly in terms of production. But of course, just to give Gary's due, there were two of them working for Big Finish when Gary was there, and he was producing all the content. It's now one of the. I'm not sure how many Big Finish producers there are. It'd be fascinating to know.
Because one of the first things Nick wanted to do when he came on was to get a line producer, which had previously been Gary.
That's right.
He'd been the executive producer and the line producer, so he was doing everything, whereas Nick started splitting that up.
That's right.
Instantly. So yeah.
Yes. So the staff grew a lot under Nick, and there's no way it couldn't have grown like it did without Nick and obviously Nick's planning and staffing and things. So he's clever that way. But one of the jobs of the producer is to make sure the extras happen, whereas Gary just didn't have time because he was producing, he was directing, he was script editing, he was booking the next thing. Because he was doing it all, there's no possible way he could also organise extras. And also, Nick has been a lot more controlled in terms of timing. So you very rarely find a Doctor Who script in Nick's era that goes over time. It's a 15-minute story is a 15-minute story. The 25-minute episodes, 25-minute episodes. Gary was a lot more casual about how long an episode went for. He's more more Netflix than Channel 7. Or BBC in terms of however long you need to tell this story you've got. And so if Mandalorian, if the story if it's a 30-minute story, you have 30 minutes. If it's a 50-minute story, you have 50 minutes, and you just make whatever length it takes for the story to tell. And so therefore you get some episodes like in Neverland, 40-minute episodes instead of 25-minute episodes. Nick came in and very much said no, episodes are this length, this many words. So, no script goes over 10,000 words, no script does this. And so that's saved a lot of money, it saved a lot of work, and also freed up people to do extras. So what's your second thing? Have you remembered it?
Yes, the second thing I distinctly see between the two as a difference was the policy that Gary had at the time to not have any Doctor Who characters appear on Big Finish audio sort of prior to the Fifth Doctor. Because that was their Doctors. It started 5th, 6th and 7 was the start, then the 8th came on. So that was their 4 Doctors that they dealt with. So I thought it was fascinating the way Gary brought in actors from that pre-Fifth Doctor era. I'm specifically thinking of stories like The Game with William Russell, and Davros with Wendy Padbury, and Bernard Horsfall, even though Bernard Horsfall wasn't a regular on Doctor Who. It was to get those classic actors in was.
You got Annika Wills coming to be a lizard in the 6th Doctor story, where they terrified of him.
The Sandman.
the Sandman. That's Annika Wills. Yeah.
And she also played Charlie's mother.
And Charlie's mother, yep.
As well.
That was recognisable, but yes. And Caroline John in the first Master story.
Dust Breeding.
Dust Breeding. So Gary's bringing back the original cast to give them roles. Actually, you know what? It's really a shame that a lot of the original cast don't get more options than that. Because, they're amazing. I mean, Colin Baker does an amazing Russian in one of the Benny stories. And
that's right.
And he's wonderful.
That's Birthright, isn't it?
It is indeed. There we go. But you are right. Yes, because Gary still wanted to work with them, but his policy was no early companions. Yeah, you're going to be with no recasts. He had to make other creative decisions to still get to work with them.
Yeah.
But we've lost that now. Boy, I'd like that back. I'd love to see some of those original cast members given different roles.
Well, don't forget, it does occasionally happen. Like Nicola Bryant does. She's so good with voices, she gets it occasionally. We had Maureen O'Brien recently in a role last year that was unrecognisable as Vicky. So
with
that was different.
Doctor, you're right.
Yes. So that was good. So they're doing it a little bit, but because the options are there to have these actors come back and retell their characters from the original series, well, of course that's what you're going to do. So, but I thought it was an inventive way that Gary did it at the time to get those actors into Big Finish at the time, even though the policy was slightly different. So yeah, just a couple of things from me on that.
Yeah, excellent. Well done.
All right, let's crawl out of the rabbit hole. It's time to talk about the first one of our Randomoid Selectortron picks, and that is the Fourth Doctor adventure, White Ghosts by Alan Barnes, and it was in the third season of Fourth Doctor Adventures and featured Louise Jameson as Leela. I'll read a blurb. It says, a close encounter with a stray missile leads the Doctor to materialise his TARDIS on a planet that hangs in the dark at the edge of the known universe. A planet so dark that it exists in near-permanent night. A planet that enjoys just a single day's light once every 1,000 years. Exactly what happens on the planet in its rare daylight hours, that's what a geographical survey headed by Senior Tutor Bengal is stationed here to establish. They, the Doctor and Leela, are about to discover that when daylight comes, the white ghosts rise. So don't be afraid of the dark. The cover of night is a mercy.
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions, The Fourth Doctor Adventures, Doctor Who, The White Ghosts.
Mirandi, where are you?
Candelli, you won't believe what I found in the far fields.
A blue box?
Leela, we are at the edge of the universe. The TARDIS stopped because someone stopped it.
Ghosts! Doctor! Ghosts? They're almost upon us.
Mirandi?
Candelli, there might be a missile about to strike the surface.
Very funny.
Give me that. Your friend isn't joking, Mr. Candelli. You have less than 2 minutes.
What missile?
The missile we came to warn you about.
Subscribers get more at bigfinish.com.
The White Ghosts, the facts and the trivia. Written by Alan Barnes, recorded July 2012 at Audio Sorcery, which is near Tom Baker and Louise Jameson's home, and released in February 2014. So we're starting to see the larger gaps appearing between recording and being released. Starring Tom Baker and Louise Jameson, directed by Nicholas Briggs, and music and sound design both by Jamie Robinson. This is the second play in the third series of Tom Baker releases. The second series to feature Louise Jameson, as the previous season had starred the late Mary Time. This is the first Fourth Doctor story written by Alan Barnes, even though he'd been a prolific writer of many other Doctors before now. At the start of the play, Leela is teaching herself to read. A number of stories are referenced, including Jack and the Beanstalk, Three Little Pigs, Babe in the Woods, and Little Red Riding Hood. There are some similarities between Jack and the Beanstalk and the White Ghosts. This story follows directly after the previous story, Kings of Sontar, as the Doctor-Leela relationship is still dealing with what had happened at the end of that story, with Leela killing off all of Strang's clones. The Doctor yells, "Geronimo!" which would later become the catchphrase of the 11th Doctor, and in fact was the catchphrase of the Doctor at this time. And the Time Lord hates vampires. The blood drinkers is referenced again and becomes significant during the play. That's the facts and the trivia.
Okay, so once again, the Fourth Doctor adventures rarely disappoints, do they, Philip?
The season after season, particularly early on again, were just such a goldmine of different material. Considering how they were produced, because the first 3 seasons in particular, the first 2 really, were all produced in one huge hit. 6 episodes for the first season, 7 and now 8. So they're getting more bold and getting more and more episodes. And Tom's enjoying himself more and more. And you can just tell, Tom is having an absolute ball. Louise is having a ball working with Tom. You can just feel the environment is just a great place to work. And the stories are just starting to roll together and become more and more creative. So yeah, the first 4 seasons, just adore them. They're brilliant.
Absolutely. I picked up, as you mentioned in the facts and the trivia, that to get the full sense of the emotional impact of what was going on in this story, you did need to hear Kings of Sontar to get that, because they were dealing quite a lot with that previous story. But it turns out by the end of it, because of the way the Doctor reacts to the vampiric nature of the aliens, that it sort of comes full circle. So there's a really, really interesting drama going on here between the 2 lead characters, which Alan Barnes plays with beautifully. The story itself is interesting. He talks about in the extras where his inspiration came from, with plants that exist in darkness and things like that. So I thought that was fascinating too. We've got an Australian actress in there called Virginia Hay. Did you mention that in the
No, I didn't.
facts and trivia? So Virginia
I thought we'd talk about cast.
So Virginia Hay is also, well, she's probably better known for being in Farscape, which is not a show that I've ever watched. I know it was around, but did you ever watch that, Philip?
No, I've never watched it. Once again, I've been meaning to get to it at some point, but there's just too much on at the moment.
And she's obviously a huge Doctor Who fan, so she was thrilled to be a part of that particular cast too. And she's Australian, so good on her.
And this is the only story she appears in for Big Finish.
Yeah. So, yeah, they're a very enjoyable story, really interesting ideas. Just as the Fourth Doctor's adventures as a range rarely disappoints, Alan Barnes rarely disappoints as well. So a very solid story, and very happy to be able to listen to it again, probably after only hearing it once.
Yeah, I think this must be the 3rd time I've listened to it, but it's certainly been a long time. It's actually made me want to go back and listen to the whole season again, because there are a number of through lines throughout the season which would be good to pick up on. And certainly the whole growing relationship and nature between the Doctor and Leela is explored, which is something that the TV show never did, because the TV show wasn't particularly into changing character or developing character. And so one of the strengths that these seasons have with Leela and Tom Baker is that you can see this growing relationship, depends on each other. More of the Eliza Doolittle training thing is happening here, but also Leela realizing she's made an error. What did you think of the scene of as she's describing her battle through the darkness with step-by-step discussion? What did you think of that?
That was interesting, wasn't it? I did pick up on the fact that was unusual. It was more like a companion chronicle, where they're describing the action, but then listening to the extras at the end, Louise is talking about really enjoying that scene. So it's like an internal monologue. You don't hear that very often in Big Finish, because they're very big on not using exposition, because you could accuse that scene of being exposition, but because it's Leela, it's nice to get inside her head and get those kind of thoughts, that thought process, while she's actually in the midst of a fight.
Yeah, it did stand out because it is unusual. Big Finish try really hard not to describe action for you and find ways around it, but they leant into it so heavily. I came through and I decided I couldn't work out at the end. I'm still deciding whether I liked it or not, because certainly they decided, we want the action, this to be an action scene. There's no other way of getting around what's going on, And so they just fully lent into what they were doing. And halfway through I was thinking, oh, I'm not really liking this. And then by the end I went, oh, you know what? They just, admitted it was happening and just went for it. So, yeah, it's okay.
Yes, you mentioned other cast, and James Joyce makes an appearance here. He doesn't do a great deal in this story, but the reason we know his name so well is that he is a regular in the new series Unit stories. Plays Captain Josh Carter.
Gets turned into an Auton.
Yeah.
Or plastic, yeah. Makes him invincible. Almost.
Is he the one that has a bit of a fling with Osgood and she gets her heart broken, or is that someone else? Can't remember.
There you go. I remember action scenes. The romance, come on.
Oh, the romance is all I'm in it for. Philip, you know that. So, yeah, that's where we know James Joyce's name from. But, yeah, all I can say about White Ghosts, apart from what we already have, is that it's a really solid story. And those, like you said, those early years of the Fourth Doctor adventures in particular, they're all good. I don't know why we're limiting it to the first 3 years, but it was still really new and really exciting. Keep in mind, this was recorded in 2012, so a long time ago now. You look at the behind-the-scenes photos, that you can tell the difference. There's a big change between both Louise and Tom over the last 10 years, as we all. No doubt if we looked at pictures of ourselves, we'd have changed too.
What do you think about the Forge vampires compared to the vampires here?
I think personally, I think the Forge vampires are a bit more interesting.
Yep.
Myself. Because it's got that sort of earthbound element that you can sort of almost relate to, whereas this was very, very alien. It was out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the universe somewhere. And I think that's what it is. It's the Earth ones are a bit more relatable because you can sort of imagine yourself potentially falling victim to the Forge, whereas this is a little bit more remote. But still, both good.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that the method of storytelling I think Alan Barnes takes was interesting in terms of the threat keeps changing, so it's not one constant threat for the whole play. First the threat's the missile, then the threat's the white ghost, then the threat's the lights, what's going to do, then the threat becomes the vampires. So throughout the whole play, the threat lasts for about 10-15 minutes, and then you move on to a different threat, moves to a different threat, to the final threat. Which I just thought was an easy way of pushing along a story, which isn't one that's commonly used, because most Doctor Who stories tends to be the main threat's the threat for the whole story, but just the way in terms of keeping the pace going was the fact that the threat kept changing, and what the final threat was, you had no idea was going to be the threat from the first scenes. So it was just an interesting progression of storytelling that way, I thought.
The Doctor's reaction at the end stood out to me. Like, these were becoming vampires, so he had to take action, and he sort of switched from, I think that was the point of, Leela and him having that confrontation in the end of the final episode, and then turning around and suddenly sort of doing exactly what Leela did. I wasn't completely sold on that though. Like, is that something the Doctor would do? In State of Decay, yes, he did what he did, but he was fearful. He almost turned into like a soldier at the end of White Ghosts, if that makes sense. The Fourth Doctor doesn't strike me as that. So even though it doesn't detract from the story at all, it just gave me a little niggle in my mind when that happened. Did you pick up on that?
Yep. No, I agree. It was an interesting choice. And once again, I do think it's part of the theme that's happening. With John, because John Dorney's script editing this season, I think he's dropping in his little themes to run throughout the 8 stories.
And there's probably more to the story that comes out through the season that I have forgotten. So, yeah.
Yeah, people are listening, why don't you drop in the comments below what you think in terms of the story, and what were the highlights and things that stood out for you.
Fantastic. Shall we have a talk about the second pick for our We've Got Randomoids?
I think we should.
All right. So the second pick was a main range story number 56, so a little bit older. Originally released in April 2004, called The Axis of Insanity. It's a 5th Doctor story. Here is the blurb. What is the Axis? For the Doctor and his travelling companions, Peri and Erimem, it's a twisted playground where reality, morality and sanity no longer apply. Stranded within a dimensional nexus, beset by the molten fury of the Firebreed, they must unwrap a terrifying mystery of damaged timelines and dark science before the corruption of the Axis spreads and reality itself crumbles. Pitted against a warped and deadly mind, the Doctor faces his own past transgressions and the very nature of what it is to be a Time Lord.
Doctor Who. The Access of Insanity.
Someone, anyone, please, if you receive this message, come quickly.
Yes, well, this is every bit as welcoming as I remember it. No sense of style, these omniscient types, which is ironic when you think about it. Admittedly, I don't remember that.
I think we've seen enough. Wait! Look! That whole passageway! It moved! It was here, and now it is there. I am sure of it.
Back inside, now.
But what about the Doctor?
Hello? You startled me. But where are my manners? I'm the Doctor, and you are...
Why, the Prince of Fools, the Joker in the pack, the Ha in Ha Ha Ha!
If this Axis place is constantly moving, changing, how will he find his way back?
I don't know. The Doctor's different. Maybe he can...
What was that?
I don't know. I don't want to know. Come on!
Perry!
Come with me, Doctor. Join my merry dance. The Overseer awaits us in the Oracle Room.
Very well, then. Lead on.
Everything has fallen apart. All our sins come home to roost. Must stop. You!
The Axis of Insanity, the Facts and the Trivia, written by Simon Furman. Recorded January 2004 at the Moat Studios and released April 2004. Very short recording and release date. Starring Peter Davison, Nicola Bryant and Caroline Morris. Directed by Gary Russell, music by Andy Harwick and sound design by Gareth Jenkins. This is the only play to be written by Simon Furman. Gary knew Simon from working with him on the comics from Marvel. Simon is best known for writing The Transformers. The play was originally meant to feature Nyssa and an adult Adric as companions. The original play was also supposed to feature the Toymaker, but at Russell's insistence it was changed to the Jester. The Elephant Graveyard for the TARDISes was first mentioned in Omega, 9 releases before this one. Gary once again hired a husband and wife team for his cast. He did that several times. Lisa Ross had played opposite Peter Davison as in Home with the Braithwaites, and the actors would reappear in the Gallifrey series in series number 4.
I remember when we picked this, well, the Randomoid Selectortron picked this one for us, you sort of hesitated a little bit. It didn't really stand out in your memory?
No, it did stand out in my memory, which is possibly why I hesitated.
Right.
My memory of it was that I hadn't particularly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And so I must admit, it's always good going back and double checking and seeing, whether the memory has remembered correctly or whether it lies or not. And so there's certainly a couple of things that stood out for me in terms of, I think for lots of Doctor Who fans, they would love this sort of thing. If you're a big fan of the Patrick Troughton Mind Robber, I think it's got a lot of memories and tinges towards that. It's got some, I guess for me, the thing that is really predominant, which I don't enjoy, is a lot of Time Lord myths and legends and rewriting Time Lord myths and legends. I personally find the Time Lords boring. I think the planet is boring. I think Russell T Davies blowing up Gallifrey was the best thing he ever did. And so when Gallifrey came back, I went, oh no, don't bring back Gallifrey. Which, can I say, I know is hypocritical because the Gallifrey audio series is one of my favourite series. And so I adore Gallifrey, particularly the first few seasons, which is, this combination of the West Wing and Dynasty. So the first few seasons of Gallifrey, the series, I adore. But in terms of Gallifrey on TV, I find it a bit boring and samey, and people wandering around talking in very, posh voices, and too many couches everywhere. I don't know why you'd have so many couches, but anyhow, Gallifrey full of couches. So I do understand why a lot of fans would really love this, and particularly if you love the whole myth thing of Gallifrey and new stories. So there's a lot of stuff for fans to like. I personally not really big. And I think the other thing that I don't particularly like in Big Finish stories is aliens and creatures you can't recognize or see, or that aren't particularly human. Now, this doesn't have that, but it does have a voice, so that the voice of the Jester just grates on me. Now,
but you could relate to it because it's right on the middle of the cover.
Well, he looks fantastic. It's obviously not how it appears, but it's interesting that actually this time through, I actually appreciated the voice and thought the voice actually did fit the character. So my memory of when I'd listened to it before was how much I hated the Jester because he just annoyed me. This time he still annoyed me, but I recognised that's what he was supposed to be doing. So I think I appreciate a lot more what the actor was doing. I think that as mentioned, of course, the actor is
Garrick Hagan.
Yep, who he's famous for.
He's Biggs in Star Wars.
He's Biggs in Star Wars, but of Doctor Who people first.
Doctor Who, he is Kai in The Mutants.
Kai in The Mutants. And I must admit, I'm not a huge fan of Kai in The Mutants. I think he's a bit boring too, and then he turns to a big glowing pile of light. But anyhow, silly hairstyle. So I'm not,
It's the 70s.
It's so 70s. Yeah, I think when he grew the moustache for Biggs for Star Wars was much better. So because it is a well-known actor in terms of sci-fi circles. So I think it's actually a better performance than I'd first given it credit for. So there's still a few things in terms of big concepts that aren't mine. But in terms of the story, I do love the relationship between Peri and Erimem. I think the opening scene with him in the TARDIS is just charming. Until Peri gets a little bit whiny and, back off. Peri, give her time. Stop treating her like she's an idiot. But I think Peri, softens a bit that way too. So lots of good scenes. What did you think?
I enjoyed this. I remember enjoying it at the time, and I'm a little bit different. I love anything to do with Time Lords. I find them fascinating. So I've never found them boring, as some people. I know some people feel the same as you, Philip. So, but I've never felt that way. And keep in mind, only 6 or 7 stories ago, or was it a bit longer? I think it was a bit longer. Maybe 10 stories ago, we had Neverland, which was also a very interesting Time Lordy style story. Well, not style. It was a Time Lord story that dealt with similar elements to what we find in here. It was interesting because you said in your facts and trivia that the toy maker was supposed to be in it. This was what it made me think of when I listened to it, and I had no idea that was the case until you just said it a few seconds ago. So my thought was that yes, this was a sort of a combination between the toy maker and the mind robber, yes, which was very, very interesting. Always interesting to see the Time Lords. I guess even at that early stage in Big Finish, that I don't know, because I wasn't into the books, so I didn't know too much whether there was Time Lord corruption and things like that was really heavily into. Of course, later when we get into Gallifrey and go more and more into it with other stories and other ranges, and even on the new TV series, there's more Time Lord corruption that we see on screen. At this stage, there's still a little bit of mystery there as far as the Time Lords go. So I always find it fascinating. I enjoyed this. It's not the best story I've ever heard, but I thought it was interesting too that Simon Furman is a comic book writer, and recently on another Randomoids we had another comic book writer, Tony Lee, who had come in and done a story as well. And to me, this and the other one were not as memorable. And I thought, is it something to do with comic book writers? But we've just talked about Alan Barnes, who of course came to Big Finish from doing the Doctor Who comic strips, and he works beautifully on audio. So knowing that Simon Furman was a comic strip writer, I kind of felt as I was listening to it that it was a little bit comic book tropey with certain things on the way through. So that was kind of sticking in my mind a bit, because I'm always trying to think, well, Simon Furman, I don't recognise the name, why hasn't he come back? So I'm listening more carefully to try and discover why. But we might get some more info from Gary himself about that in a minute, as to why he may not have come back. So,
did you ever watch the Marvel series Loki?
No.
Okay, so the Marvel series Loki is almost fully pulled from this idea. In terms of, it's all about a time agency that goes about the history, destroying wrong line paths. And so where a path has diverged in time in the incorrect way and a new time path is being created, their job is to go back and end that time path and remove the people from the time path. And I'm not trying to say what the term they use is. They use a term, it's not sterilized, but they're basically sterilizing timelines. And this idea of timelines that go wrong, that the Time Lords put into one area to keep them not damaging the web of time. That whole concept there is actually what Loki's all about. So I don't know whether people in Loki ever listened to this story, but this whole idea of timelines going wrong is what the whole of Loki is based on.
Yeah. Whereas if this agency is trying to fix things, this is just basically a timeline rubbish dump that the Time Lords have put there, basically. Yeah. That's the sense I get. They're not trying to fix anything. However, that was another interesting thing about the story. Right at the end, it seemed to end really quickly with the Doctor saying, right, we're going to go and fix this up. And then the story just ends. So it almost got a sense of there's another story there, or the story hasn't quite finished. It seemed to end really abruptly for me. Yeah. And I wonder if Simon actually wrote that so that we might be able to get that story as well. I mean, Rob Shearman has said that he's written like that in the past, with Jubilee in particular. I got the sense of that. I don't know if you felt the same.
It did seem a slightly abrupt ending, but sometimes it does feel that way.
Yeah. Some other cast members were Lisa Ross playing Jarrato. She is married to Garrick Hagan. So, husband and wife team. Who are the other husband and wife teams that we had?
Chimes of Midnight.
Yes, Chimes of Midnight, husband and wife team there. Jubilee, Martin Jarvis and his wife. I can't remember her name off the top of my head.
Yep. There's 8th Doctor ones too.
Okay. So there is a few there.
A few. Saves them transport costs. You can travel together.
But that would have been interesting. Roy North was the straight man for Basil Brush on television. So that's interesting, particularly for people in the UK.
Stunt casting. That's stunt casting if it's been J&T.
Stephen Mansfield plays a character called the Bird Trader. Now, Stephen Mansfield, from my research, I found that he worked on some of the design on 80s Doctor Who. So he was doing things like masks and things like that. It's really, really interesting. He even had a part in Shakedown. He played one of the Sontarans.
Right.
I don't think he was one of the lead Sontarans. But he may have had something to do with the design of that as well, if he was doing masks and things like that. So that was interesting, and he's done a few bits and pieces here and there for Big Finish. That's just a little bit of trivia about the cast.
It's worth pointing out the cover, because the cover is just
a Lee
beautiful
Binding.
Piece of work by Lee Binding. Lee does wonderful covers all the time, and I just love how he just works with one color palette. So this is just working with reds and tones of red. It's just a beautiful palette that gives you that whole circus jester feel.
That was another. We were talking about the difference between the eras. When Nick Briggs came on, they put that sidebar down the side, which took away the whole front cover sort of layout that you could have, like Gary Russell's ones. And I always miss those. Yes, we're back to it now.
Back to them now. And it's striking when you get a whole cover picture.
Yes.
It is so striking. So as much as I understand why the bars were put there to try and link doctors and things together, it's for me searching for something. It's a quick way to finding things, looking for episodes. But now the full covers are back. They're beautiful and glorious and colourful. And like originally they were. I'm really loving it.
Mm. Okay. Was there anything specific you wanted to mention about it before we throw to Gary?
No, let's throw to Gary. I'm sure he's got a lot of great things to say.
Here he is.
I'd wanted to work with Simon. I mean, I'd known Simon, obviously, since my Marvel days. So I wanted to work with him, and I bumped into him. I can't remember. It must have been a party somewhere or a pub meeting or something like that. And I said to him, because he'd done a couple of Doctor Who comic strips, so I knew he knew his Doctor Who stuff, and we'd always gotten quite well when, in my Marvel days anyway. So I said to him, would you like to do a Big Finish? Or he might have said, or what's these Doctor Who audios you're doing? Anyway, one way or another, I didn't hesitate. Just, yes, absolutely. I said, go away and you know, come up with an idea. And he came back, and I think he came back with the Davison story. Or did he? Or did he come back with the Collins? No, I think it was a Davison story. I'm fairly certain it was a Davison story. But I think it was Nissa and Tegan and probably Adric. I think he hadn't realised we hadn't got those. Well, we've got Nissa, but we didn't have Tegan or Adric at that point. And I said, no, look, we're doing this stuff with Peri and Erimem. And he was like, oh, that's nice. And I gave him a couple of the Erimems to listen to. And that sort of reshaped his original pitch. So he gave me another pitch. And I immediately fell in love with the idea of this kind of Sargasso Sea in space where all these broken timelines all come together and then just stop. And sitting in the middle of it is this guy, like a sort of, I think he originally wrote him as a really sort of 990-year-old librarian, sitting there and just sort of marking everything off and ticking stuff and go, oh, that timeline's finished, tick. And, you know, putting the end of it into a little sort of cabinet somewhere so the timeline just went. And the whole Axis idea really appealed to me because of my obsession with anything Time Lord related. And so I commissioned it. And then I think in the outline, the character of the Jester was very small, and Jarrato was much bigger. And I said to him, no, that Jester is an amazing character. If I can find the right actor, make that the villain all the way through and have the twist at the end of Jarrato come in literally towards the end of episode 4. Don't blow it in episode 1. Because, I think the Jester was kind of always seen as this kind of character just in the background giggling. And I thought, no, this is a really interesting character to have. So we developed that and off we went and wrote it and did a couple of drafts and we went into studio with it. I thought it was brilliant. It was everything I wanted to do. It was like a comic strip version. It was the closest we got, I suppose, to sort of Voyager, as in the Doctor Who comic strip, but on audio. I just thought, this has the reason for having Simon is I knew he'd have that kind of comic strip approach to the whole thing and just he wasn't obsessed with making it all fit into established continuity. That was my job. He just wanted to do the kind of story he would have written if he was doing a Doctor Who comic book. And that's what he did. And that was it. I went into studio, I cast it, got a fantastic cast. How
did you find Garrick Hagan?
Working with Garrick is always good. I'd known Garrick. I can't remember how I'd known Garrick. I must have met him at a convention or something. And so I remember just calling him up and saying, look, I've got this really insane part that's, I said, think Mark Hamill's version of the Joker. I said, but, maybe ramped up a bit. And it was him that suggested his wife to come and play Jarrato. He thought that would be quite amusing if she did that. And it meant they could actually sort of work on a lot of stuff before they got to the studio. And I was like, fine by me. If you want to do rehearsals, you do that. So, they were great. And Garrick just gave 110% over those 2 days. He was phenomenal. And then we had an actor called Mark, whose surname I can't remember, which is awful. I want to say Mark Danbury, but I don't think it is Mark. But his name is Mark.
It is Mark Danbury.
It is Mark Danbury. My God, where am I dredging these things up? Well, Mark's sadly no longer with us. He died actually quite soon after we'd recorded. But he was brilliant. He was fantastic, doing this kind of savage who then turns into this really kind of important person who's got a vested interest in the whole story, and quite noble, and someone for Erimem and Peri to really play off, which I thought was very nice. And I remember Peter Davison, who is not known for turning up to a recording, having even read the script, but confessing that he'd actually read this one, and was very glad that he did because he thought it was one of the best ones he'd done. He was really excited at the beginning of the studio to go in and do it, and he was very excited at the end that he'd done it. He really enjoyed it, and it was a good day. It was a good couple of days. It was good atmosphere. Small cast, which is nice. We had Roy North in, who means probably nothing to anyone in Australia, except probably any expats who'll go, "Oh, it's Basil Brush's straight man." And I was very excited to get Roy in, and Roy was only there for about 2 hours. We did all his scenes in one go. But he was lovely, and he was very excited to do Doctor Who. Because, of course, all this is done at a time when Doctor Who wasn't on TV. So everyone was like, we'd like to do a Big Finish because this is our only chance to do Doctor Who because we never got to do one when we were on telly. And that was very much Roy's approach to it. He was very excited to come and do it.
Now, this is Simon's only Big Finish credit. Was it just the fact that... Did he not like the experience, or it just never came out another opportunity?
Bear in mind that I was gone, I would think, 18 months after that happened. So I would have used Simon again quite happily.
Right. Yeah. It's just, as you said, yes, I guess so. Most of your spots would have been filled for the next 18 months, I assume, around by this time.
By the time, bear in mind that, I usually worked a year ahead. So I always knew them. Every time somebody wrote something for me, or indeed acted in something, they were like, I'm going to do another one. And I was like, well... in about a year, I might have some slots, but I was very keen. I mean, Simon, I think, came in that year that I had, which would be 93 or 94, where I said that the whole year, with the exception of 2, so 10 out of the 12 were going to be new writers new to Big Finish, rather than relying on the same old people. I think the only people who were in that year who'd worked before were Joe and Nick Briggs. Everyone else that year was new to Big Finish, and I think Simon was one of those. Well, I left in 2006, so I knew what I was doing for 95. And actually, at the time I left Big Finish, I had commissioned well into 2007. So Nick had the awkward task when he took over from me of firing quite a lot of people because they weren't scripts that he wanted to do, which is fair enough. So yes, there were people I'd commissioned and scripts that were, certainly storylines were done, and I think some scripts were possibly underway as well. That like they went into the axis of insanity itself. That sort of were going along, and then suddenly they went off on a little divergent timeline to nowhere. But yeah, I tended to work sort of at least a year, sometimes more than a year ahead, because you had to, because you just couldn't afford with a monthly schedule. And in those days, I was only doing 12 and a few 4-part extra series like Gallifrey and things like that. I couldn't cope if I wasn't working that far in advance. Otherwise, everything would come to a grinding halt. You suddenly go one day, Christ, these 3 stories aren't ready and something's got to be released next week. So we always wrote and directed and produced. We banked well in advance. There was never a point, I think, after about year 3 of Big Finish, where we were ever in a situation of going, oh my God, something's due on sale next week and we haven't recorded it yet. That happened once. That I don't know, it was next week, but it was sort of like 2 months away, and we were like, we haven't actually got July's thing even produced yet. And once that happened once, I made sure that never, ever happened again, because that's just hell for everybody, but especially for me, because it was just me and Ian Farrington running the whole thing. So, I don't know how Nick and John Ainsworth and that team, even though there's loads of them now, cope with the sheer volume that they have to put out every single month. I mean, it was driving me mad, and that was, nearly 20 years ago.
Yeah, maybe they're mad.
Well, I think doing this job sends you mad. Yeah, definitely. The only other thing I'd like to say about it, because I think it's the most exciting things about it, is Lee Binding's cover, which I think is a phenomenal piece of artwork. And that we sat down together and worked out what that was going to be, and he created that jester. And I love that cover. I think it's phenomenal.
The colours are beautiful.
There was a time.
Works, doesn't it?
Yeah, there was a time during the play that I actually stopped, because I think they described the jester as having unblinking eyes. So I went, I'll go back and have a look at that, and had a close look at the eyes. And yeah, there is a lot to appreciate in that cover.
It's very good. One of Lee's very best.
Brilliant. Actually, was there anything you want to say about the regular cast? I mean, you mentioned Peter, Nicola, Caroline.
They're both brilliant. I mean, Caroline was an unexpected joy. We did. I had the script in from Ian for Eye of the Scorpion, and I remember I was reading it I was on a plane to Chicago with Jason one of the rare occasions of actually sitting on a plane with Jason rather than him going, I'm leaving you in economy and I'm going to go and sit in, business or first or with the pilots. And he actually had to sit with me for an entire journey to Chicago. I don't know how he coped. And I was reading a load of scripts that I brought with me to read, and one of which was I the Scorpion. And I'd said to Jason a long time previously, I wanted to have in the same way that we'd done Evelyn, I wanted to do a new companion for the Davison stuff, someone really to pair off with Nicola, because I thought, Nicola's getting quite a short shrift. It's very easy. Peri is an interesting character for people to write for, in as much as of all the companions from the sort of 80s era that we got to play with, she is the one that writers inevitably fell back to writing what they'd seen on television, which you think sounds like how it should be, but actually is quite terrible, because everyone wrote her as a whiner and a screamer, and all she ever did was make bitchy, sarcastic comments. Well, she didn't do that with Davison's Doctor on television in that brief time they had. That's more of a Sixth Doctor thing, but also it's crap. It's a terrible definition of a far more interesting character. So I was always saying to writers, no, think about Nicola. Don't think about Peri. Think about Nicola. Think what she can do. She's a fantastic actress. She's very, very underused in Doctor Who. She's an amazing actress. There's not much she can't turn her hand to. And writers still weren't really giving her very much good stuff. And I could tell Nicola was thinking, so I thought, at one point, I think I was thinking, there's nothing to say that she didn't have a sister or a stepsister. And I was thinking, we could go back and meet her family, and then a sister could come and join her for a bit. And I thought, no, we've just done that with Ace and her brother. And then this script came in with Erimem, and I just thought, this is a really well-written script with a really well-defined character. And I just said to Jason, this is our new companion. Can we have her? Can we pay Ian something, or maybe ask him if we can do it and not pay him? And I think she'll work really, really well. And Jason said, I'll tell you who'd be really good to play it is Caroline Morris. And I was like, okay. And those two things meshed together. So Caroline was the only person we ever thought of for playing Erimem. And so she came in, and Nicola and Peter both adored her. And just what in that Eye of the Scorpion story, the frisson between the three of them was fantastic. So it made the decision. The end of that, I said to Caroline, I said, do you want to do more? And she said, what would you like me to do next? And we said, actually, we're thinking of making Erimem a regular if you're interested, with Nicola and Peter. So it meant that all those subsequent stories, the next run of stories, always had Peri paired off with Erimem and the Doctor going off and doing his own thing, because it made Peri a much more rounded and interesting character. If she could sort of go, I'm almost the Doctor to Erimem as the companion. Everything I've learned from the Doctor, I can now impart to this new character. And that just makes scripts far more interesting. We did the same thing with Ace and Hex later, where again, Ace became the Doctor and Hex became the companion, because it's like you teach people these things and then that they're passing it on to the next generation. So I found Erimem a very interesting character, and it was, done because I knew that Nicola would really relish the chance to do something new.
Well, even in the opening scenes of Axis of Insanity, we have Peri teaching Erimem how to read. So
that's right. The whole Alice in Wonderland. It is Alice in Wonderland, isn't it?
Did you write that? That actually sounds like your writing.
The fact that it's Alice in Wonderland makes me think it might be my writing, but no, actually, I do think that's Ian. I think that's all Ian. I don't think I was to be that clever to come up with the writing thing, the reading thing. Because Axis must be her first story, isn't it? After Scorpion.
Church of the Crown is Necromantia, then Axis.
Oh,
so
wow.
There's a couple in between.
Oh, they took that long for her to learn to read.
Well, I think they started working on the reading earlier. I think this was just another reading lesson.
Right. Did the reading thing start? Yes. Now, did the reading thing actually start in Church and the Crown?
I think it did.
Because that is definitely a Mark and Cav thing then. That is so what Mark and Cav would have done, I think. Yes, that rings a bell now. God, this is dredging my memory back from 20 years, isn't it? So, yeah, maybe we carried it on. There might even have been a bit of it in Necromantia.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. I must admit that opening scene felt like you, and I was just wondering whether you're not.
No, it's definitely. Well, I say that now you said that, and it isn't the start of that. It might have been me doing something with that because of what happened in Church in the Crown. I honestly can't remember. I don't feel my gut doesn't tell me that it's me. My gut would tell me that it's Ian. And I might have just said to him, look, this is sent in the seeds from Church in the Crown and gone, do this. Sorry, yes, why am I saying Ian? I keep saying Ian. I mean Simon. Simon.
You're saying Simon before, that's fine.
Getting that, my eyes of scorpions and axes is mixed up. Yes, all those times when I've just said Ian, I mean Simon.
Yes, you only said it twice before, that's fine. And I knew what you were saying. All good.
It was always great to hear from Gary Russell.
It is. I just love the fact you can just wind him up and he just keeps going.
Yeah, it's lovely.
I can't believe he can pull out so much stuff from his head from that period of time when he was working on so many productions, and yet his knowledge of what was happening, who was happening with, I think that's astounding.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Gary. We really appreciate it. Now, there's two things to do before we finish up today's episode, and the first thing is to find out what's next for our next instalment of
We've Got Randomoids.
So let me bring up the Randomoid Selectortron and we'll pick the first one. Okay. I've got a feeling they're going to be good, Philip.
Do you?
I do.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right, the first one. Very close to only 10 stories away from the one we're doing today. It's story number 66, and it is also a Fifth Doctor story, but it's a Fifth Doctor and Nyssa story called The Game. And I mentioned this earlier.
Oh, you mentioned it. Okay.
So it's great to be able to do this. It's one of my favourites. It's a fascinating little story. Interesting in that it's 6 parts, but crammed onto 2 discs. So it's interesting the way this is done. And also William Russell's first appearance. So I'm looking forward to having another re-listen to that and talk about it.
I don't remember anything about it at all.
Oh, is that right?
I have no memory of this story whatsoever. So
really?
I love
it. I love it. I can't wait to get your thoughts on it.
Good.
All right, let's have a look at the second one. Oh, I think you're going to like this, Philip. It is Companion Chronicles number 6.7, The Anachronauts.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Which is a Stephen Taylor and Sarah Kingdom story. So, looking forward to doing that. I love it when the Companion Chronicles come up because
it's double-parter?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yep.
It's a long one.
It's a double CD.
Double CD.
No, that's all right. That's what we'd be doing anyway.
Do you know it? Have you listened to this one?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I know you've mentioned it before. I'm sure there was an episode where we were doing recommendations and you recommended this one to get into.
Yeah, I do love it. It's great.
Excellent. So that's next time for We've Got Randomoids. That only leaves us to recommend a couple of things that we've been listening to. And you're not going to believe this, Philip. You are not going to believe this. It's your turn.
Oh, it's not. Are you sure it's my turn?
Positive.
Great, okay. Good stuff. Well, I have started listening to Cass, the new 9th Doctor.
8th Doctor, perhaps?
Oh, yeah, go 8th Doctor. 8th Doctor, then. So I've only listened to the first story so far, and I was intrigued to see how they managed to bring Cass back, and I still don't know. So, great first story, bit timey-wimey, bit... I don't think how you describe it. Anyhow, it's interesting. I think it's got meanwhile elsewhere. And so certainly it actually starts every scene actually at the very beginning ends with meanwhile elsewhere, and then you have a short scene meanwhile elsewhere, and then I thought, oh, this is going to get annoying if it keeps happening, but they stopped doing it. But in your head, you're still going meanwhile elsewhere. And so the whole story really is based around the whole idea of meanwhile elsewhere. I can't wait to get to the rest of the stories, which may not happen for a while yet because life is crazy at the moment. But I love the 8th Doctor. I've been enjoying the Time War. It was a bit sad when I heard his companion wasn't coming back, but she's just so busy. But he's traveling with his grandson. He's traveling with Cass, and it's kicked off really well. So if you don't listen, love to know what other people are thinking of it. And by the time you listen to this, I will have finished it.
Very good.
What about you, Dwayne? What are you listening to?
Well, I've just listened to the Target novelisation of The Romans.
So have I.
And I am thoroughly delighted by this release. Because of the way Donald Cotton wrote it, he wrote it like a series of entries. So like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Jekyll and Hyde are written like letters and diary entries and things like that. So they get different voices. So I think the voices are Dan Starkey, Tim Treloar, Louise Jameson, Maureen O'Brien,
Claire Corbett.
I feel like I'm missing somebody. John Coleshaw's in it too. He plays Nero. So 6 people on this one audio. It's almost like an audio play.
List them out. So John Coleshaw's playing Nero, so all Nero's entries, which are hilarious. Louise Jameson is doing Barbara.
Yep.
And she's a lovely Barbara.
Oh, it's got Jamie Glover too doing Ian. So is that 7 people?
So Jamie Glover's doing the Ian parts, which that's a nice bit.
Yep.
You've got Dan Starkey doing the First Doctor, and his First Doctor
various things.
Hilarious.
Yep.
Maureen O'Brien, which you thought, Vicky, but it's not Vicky. She's playing the poisoness.
Yes.
So the one who prepares all the poisons and writes
and the way she does it.
Oh, I laughed
beautiful.
and laughed. John Coleshaw. Who else? What's
John Coleshaw's doing Nero.
Who are the other?
Tim Treloar doing all the little bit parts in all these different accents.
Yes, but all these legionaries. I mean, the funniest ones are the Roman legionaries. Talking about going off to kill the Doctor, then failing, and running home to mum and dad, and talking about hiding down the sewers and dropping me down a note down the second sewer, and there's a P.S. Why aren't you writing back to me? I laughed and laughed. Yes, brilliant.
If anyone asks me now at the moment, what's your favourite audio Target novelisation, it would be this one. It's absolutely superb, so I highly recommend anyone grab a copy of that now. And we've probably got some good stuff coming up soon from some people who are involved with that story as well, so stay tuned. Now, you said life was very busy. One of the reasons your life is very busy, Philip, is because you've taken on the responsibility of organising Janet Fielding coming to Australia. So there are a few events that are happening, one in Brisbane, one in Sydney, and one in Tasmania, in Hobart, Tasmania. So
had to come to you, Dwayne.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Could have not come to you.
So that's very good. If you want to keep up to date with any news that's happening or when tickets go on sale, head to janetfielding.sirensofaudio.com and register your email address there. We will let you know as soon as tickets go on sale. I'm hoping that will be very soon.
If not by now. Oh, when's this coming out? Tomorrow.
But
no.
believe it or not, this is one of the closest to release recordings that we've ever done. I'm editing this straight after we finish, and it's going out tonight. There you go. So they won't be out by tonight. In the next week.
Next week or so. And we have another special announcement to make soon as well. About another person coming to Sydney.
Yes.
Brought by the Sirens of Audio as well.
You just when you didn't have enough to do, Philip.
I know. Well, I'm hoping I can redo what I've done with Janet with another guest, but yes. Be aware there's another guest coming to Sydney as well.
Very good. All right, that'll do us for today. Thank you so much for your company, Philip.
Thank you for yours, Dwayne, as always.
And we'll catch you all next time.
Bye.
This has been the Sirens of Audio episode 140, Randomoid 17, featuring the stories White Ghosts and The Axis of Insanity, with our guest Gary Russell and your hosts Philip Edney and Dwayne Bunny. Original theme music composed by Joe Kramer. Our website is sirensofaudio.com. You can email us at sirensofaudio@gmail.com or contact us via any one of our socials. Thanks for listening, audiophiles. We'll hear you next time.